But the point is that they're very kindly hosting us, but we need to keep the footprint of our event to this classroom. We can't be in the common areas because there are people having meetings, there are people working, this is their workspace, so we can't be out there. It's totally fine to use the bathroom and go back and forth, but you can't be outside. And also, we do not use the kitchen. We can't use the kitchen, and we can't help ourselves to coffee. It's not ours to take. Neither are any of the cups and glasses or any of that. We're going to share with them for lunch, and we'll have plenty of time to mingle around the space at this particular moment. But please stay out of the kitchen and do not use the coffee because this is CSI's coffee, and we're going to provide you guys with coffee throughout the week. This is the only day that we don't have it. I'm really sorry about that. You'll have plenty of caffeine during the week. Just don't help yourself to it today. We have some water. We're going to give you food at lunch. Just be very, very mindful of the people here. It looks like a really cool and fun place, which it is, but it is a workspace at the end of the day, and people are here to work. Is that all right? I'm really sorry. I don't mean to scold anybody here, but we just can't be around and helping ourselves to stuff. Is that all right? Promise? I'm a bad cop here.
Okay, you guys. So we're gonna have now. The session on action-driven entrepreneurs for social change. Hey guys. So we're gonna have the session on action-driven entrepreneurs. We're gonna have 4 speakers giving individual presentations. We're very excited. They're here. Please welcome them with me. And then after that, we're going to change format and we're going to have a panel. Alright? So I'm going to give the floor, without any further transition, to Say. And I'm going to use another chair because we're trying to touch it. I'm going to do another chair. You sure?
There's a tall chair over here. There's a tall chair?
Sure. So for information, guys, it's 10 minutes presentation.
Hey everyone. Actually, can you hear me without the mic? Yes?
Yes.
All right. As Margot said, my name is Stacey. Actually, Judy, would you mind picking up? All right. So I started a social impact consulting group named Tandem in 2008. Worked in the Middle East and Africa with our clients for about 4 years before coming back to the US. And most recently worked for a startup named B Team.
I don't know if you've heard of it. You're all enviro folks, but this is Richard Branson. You know him as the Virgin Guy, and Jochen Zeitz. You might know him as Puma Guy. Richard Branson and Jochen started the B Team as a way to shift the dialogue around business, business and climate change and environmental issues and sustainability. I think we all know that business has a reputation for being evil or for wanting to drive just profit, and this is an attempt to ensure that business is a driving force, not just for profit, but for social and environmental benefit as well. But those are not the startups that I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about Covalent, which is a new initiative that's being started by myself and 2 friends and colleagues. Before I get into what Covalent is, I want to talk a little bit about the problems that we are trying to solve. And there are 3 of them. The first one is that there is a serious race and gender problem in Silicon Valley. We're looking, based on recent numbers, at a 5% Latino community and a 4% Black community, which is nowhere near the numbers of those populations nationally. We're also looking at a coder population where we're seeing maybe 20% of coders actually being women. So what that means in reality is that on a daily basis, women and people of color are going into meetings, they're going into interactions with the rest of the VC and Silicon Valley tech community, and they are encountering a system that is rigged against them. And that is reflected in the investment numbers. When you take a look at who's getting money, 83% of VC-backed internet and Series A companies are white-only teams. So this is a serious problem, and we're seeing it at Google, we're seeing it at Facebook, we're seeing it at small startups in Silicon Valley. The second issue that we're trying to address is this issue of what kinds of technology are we seeing. So Elon Musk, a couple of years, had an interview. You guys know him as the Tesla guy, SpaceX. He was doing an interview where he implied that there's not a whole lot of tech happening that is good for the planet, good for people. You're seeing people wanting to make a fast buck, and the easiest way to do that is to threaten Facebook or Google. So you end up with the next Tinder app or the next WhatsApp, stuff that's fun and entertaining, but not necessarily good for communities. So we want to try to change the incentives that are driving that interaction. The third thing that we're going to be doing is focusing on community engagement. And I don't know if you guys can see from the back, but we have polar bears and children in disenfranchised communities. There are communities that don't have the skills, voice, funding, or access to speak for themselves. And often what happens, and Judy will probably touch on this as well, is that, especially in development, you see people, well-intentioned people, going into communities thinking that they have the solution and just shoving the solution down people's throats without ever asking, is this what you want? Is this what you need? Is this going to be effective for you? And so the third issue that we're going to work on is how do we engage communities more effectively? How do we ensure that they have a voice and that they have a say in the technology that is going to ultimately affect them? So let's get into a little bit of what Covalent actually is, and unfortunately, I don't have a ton of time to go over the nitty-gritty, but we are approaching this as a community issue, and so our solution is a community solution. And we're bringing together coders, entrepreneurs, and innovators to create and bring to market technologies that will ultimately make the world a better place. And so there are very specific things, very specific ways that happens. It's about shifting investment. It's about getting the right funders in the door. It's kind of an incubator, but we hate using the word incubator because that word has been overused so much in this community. But that's essentially what it is. And I'm happy to talk to you guys more about the solution and how we're going to approach it later. But basically, we're looking at stacking the deck and making sure that a certain percentage, probably 50 to 60% of our community is women, and that 50 to 60% are people of color. And the reason that we're focused on this being a community is because recruitment, anyone who's worked with diversity knows, recruitment is only half the problem. If you have hired a black female CEO, and 2 years later she walks out because sorry, this is my phone ringing. Yeah. And 2 years later she walks out because the situation is so hostile and the board is hostile, you have ultimately failed. So retention is also part of the game. That we need to build ecosystems of support around these people so that they feel like they are able to stay in pretty hostile conditions. Let me get into the challenges. So I'm going to focus on a very specific challenge, which is the co-founder challenge. Issues with your co-founder is one of the main reasons why a startup will fail. There are a lot of reasons. You're going to see, articles on 18 reasons or 13 reasons, the top 10 reasons why a startup will fail. Co-founder issues are among, you will just see a trend. They are on every single list that you're going to encounter. And there are a plethora of reasons for that. So this is a photo of me on June 1st in Central Park. With 4 EMTs hovering over me. I love this photo because that particular EMT looks really concerned. I had been playing a particularly aggressive game of capture the flag, and on my 4th time jumping over a wire mesh fence, I got caught in the fence and ruptured my Achilles. And if anyone has gone through that, it is a minimum 4-month, maximum 18-month recovery process. It is something that takes you out for a long time. So it can be something as simple as this, or getting hit by a car. It can be your co-founder deciding, I don't really care about this project anymore. It can be your co-founder meeting the love of his life and disappearing for 4 months. But you will encounter co-founder issues. And I speak from experience because my very first startup, I had to ask my co-founder to leave. I gave him a choice. He was underperforming, and we had to have a very difficult conversation where I said, you can either start to perform in X, Y, and Z ways, or you can opt to leave. And he left. And that is an incredibly stressful situation to be in because suddenly you are holding the bag by yourself. Everything depends on you. So, I know this sounds really dire. I don't want to scare you guys. There are ways around this. It's unfortunately not a science. It's not formulaic. But what it means is that you need to have early communication frequently and often as you possibly can. It means having early communication. It means writing it down. I know people are averse to that, but if you can get it concretely on paper, it helps later on. It means deciding what your financial equity and split is going to look like before you are bridged. A lot of people put off that conversation until the money starts rolling in, and you can just imagine, family members that get an inheritance and suddenly they have to decide who gets what. That's not a pretty conversation. So have that conversation early. How do we have time? Oh, okay. It looks like I'm almost out of time. So what I would say, there are 2 particular resources that I want to point you towards. The first is a blog post by Seth Bannon, B-A-N-N-O-N, and I'm happy to, maybe Margo, we can send that information out or something. But Seth Bannon recently went through a disastrous, catastrophic failure, had to fire most of their staff. There was a really terrible co-founder split that happened, a breakup. It was incredibly painful, but in the process of going through that experience, he wrote an extremely eloquent blog post talking about what went wrong and the lessons that he learned. So I really highly recommend that. That's one of the first things you read. And also Paul Graham. If you're thinking about starting something up and you do not know who Paul Graham is, you should know who Paul Graham is. He's the co-founder of Y Combinator, which is one of the most successful Silicon Valley incubators on the planet. So definitely look him up. He's got a specific piece on, I think it's 13 reasons why startups fail. And I definitely recommend that you guys read that and go through it. So I'm going to leave you with a little bit of advice. Know yourself. really well, go into therapy, work out your shit, because the co-founder relationship is going to be as intimate, if not more intimate, than any relationship you've ever had before. Your significant other will resent that person. Your dog will resent that person because you're never around to walk it. But definitely know yourself as you go in, because that is such a critical relationship, and it is one of the reasons that will make or break your startup. So. Sure. Next. So yeah,
Sure. So our next speaker, guys, is Sonia. So a lot of you know her. She's a Primex and she started her company. So we're again very excited to have people from our network who started companies.
Okay. So I like to walk around. So if you don't hear me, let me know and I'll speak louder. So I want to tell you a story about change. Should I photo?
Yeah. Should you want to do that?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm one of the co-founders of Momo Effect, which is a social enterprise that works with innovative youth to kind of enable them to develop and implement solution-oriented ideas and business plans. And we want to focus particularly in the developing world. If you don't know me, when I'm on Primex, I'm always the one arguing, well, how are we going to involve young people that don't have access to internet? That's me. That's what we're trying to do, especially in the business sector. So we want to reach out to all young people, like we don't want to discriminate, but especially to those that don't have access to spaces like this. I'm from Mexico, my co-founder is from Italy, and we met at the UK, and this is where our story begins. So we started our business back in 2012. Everything was going great, we were doing awesome. And then immigration laws changed. Yeah, that's awesome. I don't know how many of you are migrants and are thinking of maybe starting a business somewhere other than your country. If you can relate, then this is the story for you. So basically, the migration laws changed and I had to leave. I was asked by the UK government to leave. I had been living there for 5 years, which kind of sucks. So I left, and then eventually my co-founder left as well. She went back to Italy. So then we were faced with this huge issue. How do you do a startup? Like, we're just beginning across time zones and across the world. How do you communicate? Like you were saying, that it's very intimate. But when you have time zones in the middle, you sometimes have to work at 4 a.m. so she's able to pick up your call, or vice versa. You have to adjust, right? So we had definitely not planned on this happening. So we had no idea what we were doing. We're really good with people. We love working with communities, like getting our hands dirty. But we had no idea about business whatsoever, let alone how to start a business being halfway across the world from each other. So she moved to Texas, where my parents live. We met there. Immigration laws struggle again. Both had to leave. So safe to say it's been a constant struggle, but we have been able to adapt. And I think that's one of the key things that I want to teach you or talk to you about today. It's adaptability in this business is absolutely key. You have to be open-minded that the idea you start with is not a completed product that you end up with. You have to be open to immigration laws changing. You have to be open to the environment around you changing, to your co-founder saying they're not interested anymore. If you're not able to adapt and be open-minded and you hold on to that original idea, you're going to fail. But if you're here, that means that you're open-minded. So just remember that when you're struggling the most, you say, okay, this sucks, but how am I going to make this a good situation? So on the happy part, I guess, of our story, we now have team members across Europe, North America, and South America. which is great for us, yay. But we're all still across the world. So we found a way to make things work for us. None of us are very tech savvy. I don't know much about computers, but we've used simple things like the cloud, Evernote, Google Docs. They're great assets that you can use. Also, what we've done with our team is we're multidisciplinary. We don't all see things the same way, and that's what makes it so great. So make sure you surround yourself with people that maybe believe in the idea, but don't see things exactly like you do. Because when change hits you, they're the ones that are going to help you grow. They're going to tell you, okay, maybe you can adapt this way. And that's what you're doing. So make sure you surround yourself with a good, solid team with different skills, different disciplines. Like we have engineers in our team, we have people like me that are people, and and we have business people. So just make sure that you have a solid team that you trust and that you will be able to rely on the most. And then the other thing that I wanted to tell you was, I know there's a lot of pressure in this business when you're starting out to be innovative, to come up with something completely different. And I'm here to tell you that you don't. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you can make it better. And there's this thing about the long nut that I'm hoping the video will work. If not, I'll try to explain it to you. But I want to show you a video to make my point that I think applies as much to movements as it does to business. Can you hear? Have any of you seen it? I don't think so. No, it's not working. Okay. So, okay. But they can still see it. You can see it. Okay. Okay. So if you don't get a part or anything, let me know. But otherwise, I have to go through that. So basically, he's talking about how to create a movement, but I think this is really key in starting a business. And he's talking about the long nut, which was the first act, was dancing. And this video focuses a lot on leadership, but I think it's crucial when you're starting. You need that one person to believe in your crazy idea. If you're the one starting it, you're probably the long nut. When that first person believes in your idea, then you're no longer a long nut. So that would be probably a co-founder, I think. Right? And then you start getting your team. Right? So now we have like the making some team. And then we get your early followers, early adopters. Thank you. And then you have the movement, right? Then your business starts taking off. People start buying your service, your products, you've got it. But at the very beginning, you were the long nut. So you need someone to believe in you. So it's just basically about creating movement. and then you become big business and everyone's buying your products. That's right. That's where we all want to be. But I think what he says is quite key, and I'm just going to stop here because I think I've made my point. But I mean, this is but you can go from a long nut to movement or great business or great idea, just getting that first person to believe in. And I think this is key. So, as I was saying, there's a lot of pressure to be innovative and to be a leader and to always be one doing things. But not all of us need to do that. And I mean, that video, if you get a chance to watch it, it lasts 2 minutes. It's really great. It's a great message. And basically what he's saying is, if you ever see someone, a long nut, doing something crazy, have the courage to go and join them in. So you don't necessarily have to be a leader. You don't have to be the founder. You don't have to. That long nut is going to get all the credit, yes, but he would be no one if we were not for that first person who followed him. So don't get all the pressure on yourself to try to do something good. If you know someone
and be your instrument to movement. So that's my little advice for today.
I'm just gonna go back to the mic if possible. No, like you, if you can speak at the mic, because we have the entire world watching it on live stream right now. It will be easier for them. All right, so thank you, Sonia. And now it is Jody's turn. Jody's time.
Thank you very much. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Judy, and I am the head of monitoring and evaluation and impact at actually, you know what? I'll do it myself. At a startup that was founded in 2012, and we're called Projects for All. And the first one, and the project that I wanted to talk to you about today is called Project Hello World. And it's a child-led digital education program that is focused in Africa. So this is a really scary picture. Empty classroom, kind of scary, and kind of leads me into what the problem is in the world today. About 171 million children aged 7 through 18 all over the globe today have never been to school. In sub-Saharan Africa, 34 million children are not even enrolled in primary school. To put this in perspective, that's about all the primary school kids in the United States, the UK, and France combined. So it's a really big problem. So that was the issue that we were faced with, and we kind of had this vision that we wanted to give people access to educational materials and internet connectivity, particularly in very remote areas, and we wanted to target very vulnerable groups that included children, women, and girls. So that was kind of the vision that we set out to pursue. And then our solution, not so well. A little dark, sorry about that. Our solution that we came up with is Hello Hubs, and that's our project Hello World. So you might ask yourself, what is a Hello Hub? What is she talking about? Well, it's an internet-enabled, solar-powered computer terminal. And you can see the picture right here, so those are the solar panels, and then on either side there's computer systems installed. They're all internet-enabled. There's Wi-Fi access points, so people can actually add in digital devices. There's also a charging station attached, so people can plug in and get power. And the really cool thing is that it's solar-powered, so that has two benefits. You don't have any ongoing power costs. And you ultimately have more reach because you can go in really remote and desolate areas, and you don't have the need to be connected to a power grid. So I think we tackled a couple of issues on one by coming up with this. And just to give you a little bit of background information on why we didn't build a traditional school, we really bought into Sugata Mitra's vision of child-led digital education, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work. He did a TED Talk on his Hole in the Wall project where he installed computers in really remote villages in India and kind of also had it preloaded with educational materials. And he kind of just let the kids have a go at it. And he actually found that by children working together and learning together and teaching each other, it was just as effective, if not more effective, in increasing their literacy in numerous skills. So we kind of bought into that and wanted to test that out. And that's kind of why we ended up doing it. The other advantage is that we reach about 3 times as many kids in traditional schools reach. And we're doing it at about 5% of the cost of building a traditional school. So it's a pretty good bang for your buck right there. Okay. But with all big endeavors, there's lots of challenges along the way. The first one that I'm going to talk about a little bit is funding. As we all know, money doesn't grow on trees, and it's pretty hard sometimes to convince people of a new idea that's kind of paradigm shifting. And we were such a small organization with these big dreams, it was hard to kind of get that buy-in. So what I want to say to you is that, please don't get discouraged. As she said, kind of stick to your guns, and you will eventually find somebody who will buy into your idea. And I think another important thing that we kind of learned from approaching and pitching to a lot of different funders is that you want to be very, very clear about your message. and you want to make sure that the funder understands how they fit into your project. Because in the beginning, we were so excited about all these great things that the hub could do, and we were like, oh, well, it's a human rights advocacy tool, we're keeping people with voice, and it's an educational tool because we're providing educational material, and it's like this innovative business incubator where we are hoping that businesses will grow up like the internet connectivity part. So we were trying to emphasize all these different things, and then, the feedback that we kind of got from funders was, well, I'm not, that's all great and good, but I'm not quite sure how I fit into like this great idea. So we actually did end up spending a couple of months really, trying to refine our message and tell a compelling story. But it takes time, but it's really worth the effort, and hopefully it'll pay off by getting more funding, so yay. And then, so the second big issue I think that everybody will face when they work on a startup is understanding. We were 4 people with a really big dream and a whole lot of work ahead of us. So, I think there it's really crucial, and you said this, that you get the right people on the bus, and that you have a really effective team, and that while you need to specify in the beginning different responsibilities, you also need to really communicate well together. So, for example, my team is spread all over the world. We have people in Nigeria, London, Iowa. I'm in New York, so we don't really see each other face to face. But we set up meetings, and we're actually using this cool free tool online because you want to preserve money called Open ERP, where everybody can see what everyone else is up to by listing tasks, and you can attach email chains and all of that. So if you're interested in something like that, we would definitely check that out. So it's really important to, while you have your own specialized skills, to be open to learning from your coworkers. And we also try to rotate responsibilities so that, God forbid, life happens, somebody has a baby, fall sick, we can pick up each other's tasks quite easily, and you don't have that heaving area of oh man, person in tech left, and now we don't know what to do. So that would be also an important piece of advice, to just really work together and be aware of what each one of us is doing. And then the third thing, and that I'm going to close with, is you really want to make sure that your project has longevity and is sustainable. And I know this sounds so intuitive, and like, why wouldn't you think of that? But I've seen this happen so many times in development projects where people come in with the right intentions, they set up a project, and everything's great while they're in the field, and then they leave, and the project goes belly up because the community didn't understand why the project is there. They weren't really involved, so it's a really big problem, and it keeps happening. So we're trying to change that by, and that's why I have the picture of the community, because from the very, very onset on of our projects, we really incorporate the community. We go in, we ask them what they need, if this is, if they think that this will be useful to them. So that's kind of the first step of establishing why we're there. And then we come in and we set up different working groups with them. So we have tech groups, we have data groups, we have process groups, we have women's rights groups, and we train all of the community members who are interested in directly participating and working side by side with us. So that has a positive effect that they're putting in an investment as well, and we're not just giving away a project, but rather encouraging them to take ownership and be accountable. And I think that's a really big key in making something sustainable. The other thing is, and I also see this happen quite a bit, is that people aren't putting in enough systems to really track and monitor their process, and they're not open to facing problems. I think it's kind of human nature sometimes too, when something bad happens, brush it under the table and hope it goes away and kind of just move forward. It's really not a good thing to do. It takes a little bit of courage to say, hey, we have a problem and we need to fix this. And the way of identifying that there's a problem is that you have effective ways of tracking what's going on with your project in place. So just to give you like a short little anecdote, and then I'm going to finish. The first month, our first hub was in operation. We got our numbers back, and we saw that actually women and girls, the groups we were really trying to target, were actually not using the hub that much. So it was really disappointing, and we're like, well, it's a big problem. But A, it was good that we were able to identify that there was a problem because we set up all the data, the back end, and also from data from our data groups in the communities to kind of get that feedback. And then the second part was because we had worked so closely with the community and had these groups in place and had a feedback loop, we were able to kind of go back to them and be like, hey, you know, why do you think this is happening? And what do you think would be a really good solution to this? Because they know the area so well. And we're, you know, in New York and all over the globe, so, you know, what do we know? And which is also kind of humbling. Because what we ended up finding was that a big issue of why women weren't going was because of the lighting, which was not something I would have initially come up with, but you know, it just goes to show that these processes really do help you get to interesting conversations and solutions. So we ended up installing better lighting, and it's been a little bit better now. So, you know, the advice I maybe want to leave you with is don't be afraid to you know, embrace and accept that there are problems, because there will be. Anyone who tells you otherwise is fine. So, you know, just make sure that you embrace it, you have a positive attitude about it, you see it as a learning experience and not a failure, and I think that will take you a really long way. So with that, I'd like to close, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Judy. Our last speaker is Joshua.
Okay, so I'm Joshua Wolf. I run a company just over the bridge in Brooklyn called Skypunch Creative, and we've been around in kind of one iteration or the other for about 15 years now. It's kind of scary to say it's been that long. And what we really specialize is communication campaigns around energy, environment, and climate. And a better way of framing it might be, we really specialize in communications campaigns around publicly related infrastructure entities. And that's kind of a key point. When you think about energy, environment, and climate, it really is. It's about the wire. It's about the water. And those are all fields that are incredibly, incredibly regulated. So being an entrepreneur, being a social entrepreneur in a publicly regulated field is quite a weird can of worms. It's a very different one than a lot of the tech companies that are surrounding us in Dumbo. We're kind of in tech central, and all of them are going after consumers or business, and they're regulations, but not nearly at the level we're involved in. So I got into the field because I started as a photographer working on climate change, and I did this book called Climate Change Picturing the Science with a number of folks at the Earth Institute at Columbia, and that's sort of how many of the folks here got to know me. And that was, yes, Columbia, a great place, and you're going to have a wonderful week. It's amazing. I spent lots of time there. If you need restaurant recommendations, I'm happy to talk after. And in a sense, I learned a lot by doing both. And I think this is the first lesson for anyone getting involved in entrepreneurship. I had no clue what I was doing. There is no reason to believe that I should have been allowed to do that. And if I had any common sense, I would have never agreed to do it. However, I did. Someone gave me a contract, and I decided I would finish said contract. And I did this book, and it was great, and it opened up lots of doors. But your first project, you will make lots of mistakes. And your first project should probably not be in an area with a lot of regulations, because you will make a lot of mistakes when you're regulations. But then I got involved in energy. And energy led to water and led to other areas. And the interesting thing about this is the last, I'd say, 6 or 7 years, there's been a real interest in energy and water and how those affect climate change. When I first got into it, my dad worked in the energy field, or still works in the energy field, and we ended up at the same conference. And the first time they had a climate panel at the conference, I ran into an old family friend, and he said, "Where's your dad?" And I'm like, "Well, you know, he's at the carbon trading workshop." He said, "Well, isn't that what you work on?" I'm like, "No, I work on the oh god, we're all gonna die side. My dad's working on how does he integrate this into government programs?" And they really were different. But they started to merge, and a lot of people decided we're going to get into the energy space. And very few of them are still in the energy space. And the number one reason is when you get involved in utilities, when you get involved in climate, when you get involved in water, and you're trying to solve these problems, there are big entities that have existed for a long time. And they're not all bad. I mean, there are things that they can do better, there are processes that they can improve on, but you're trying to work with these entities. And I think one of the most difficult problems you have as an entrepreneur is you see that problem. It's big, it's scary. You think you can fix it too, you know? There's a common sense solution, and you've got that solution. You've got a developer who's going to write some amazing code for you, and it's going to work. And now you go to this giant utility and say, I'm going to integrate this code. And the engineers at that utility go, okay, there are 50 million people that rely on us to make sure electricity arrives tomorrow. Your developer's 22 and just got out of school. Do you think we're going to let you anywhere near our systems? Are you nuts? And this might be a great idea, but you haven't proved it out in the following 15 ways. And there's often about a 5 to 10 year process to get anything adopted in any of these publicly regulated fields. And that's not a bad thing, because there's only one problem in any of these infrastructure issues. If the power goes out today, no one's going to say, hey, but they were trying this great new idea and it was going to solve all these problems. They're going to say, my power's out. The utility's horrible. You know, you're going to call them in the next 10 hours. And you're not going to think about all the upside. So it's really this process of thinking through how can you work with these groups and the structures they have. And so the solution we came up with, and this is kind of a fun one. We were looking at how we do education. And most energy utilities in the US are required to do something for energy savings. And the problem is, and there are also, at the same time, federal government programs for energy savings. And the problem is, if you look at it and say, there's this giant box of money to do energy efficiency education, right? Then you do a great campaign. You hire the best ad agency in the world. There's quite a large budget. But the problem is it then gets split around every publicly regulated utility. So you're talking about 12,000 entities. And then you look at the federal government dollars. Those get dropped down to the states and the territories. So you're now down to about 62 different entities. That then distribute to 900 separate entities. So pretty quickly, you're at about 13,000 groups that are publicly required to do energy education. And that big box of money became very small. And so what we did as a solution to this is we said, well, wait, there's no reason that entity A over here, entity B over here, and entity C halfway across the country can't use the same general ideas. That the best practices for all of them are the same. And so we started creating a series of educational materials, everything from children's books. This is one we worked on about energy vampires. When you leave your phone plugged in, it still sucks power away. So we created a series of stickers for kids, the energy vampire hunters. We just did this like 2 weeks ago, and so I thought I'd put it out there. But we now, our materials are now used by more than 600 organizations in all 50 states, and a lot of those will be umbrella groups, so closer to about 900 groups. And we started to put together that budget again to say, you know, there really is this larger budget to do interesting things. Because every entrepreneur here will tell you, if you have a budget of about $2,000, it goes really far to get a couple college students that will then spend all their time. But the second you go to a professional firm and say, I have $2,000, you're very proud of that. Like, don't get me wrong. The money you're going to start this is money you're very proud of. But you go to a firm and, you know, they have to pay health insurance and child care and the rest of it. It doesn't go very far. So figuring out how to bring that back together has been sort of the challenge that we really tackled. And I'll show one more. This is one that we're having fun with because of the, it's not fun. The droughts in California are absolutely horrible. It's awful. But for those of you who aren't from the States, there's a World War II poster called Rosie the Riveter. And it's a woman with a red bandana making that pose saying, you know, we can do it. And the whole point was that women on the home front could take over the factory jobs. And so we created Rosie the River Otter and put it around kind of California. And it was one of these things that each individual entity couldn't take that on. But and there might be one or two that could have, but as a group we were able to bring those dollar amounts together. And that's really been the challenge that we've been tackling, is saying, how can we bring together groups that might not work together otherwise, but we can put them under one umbrella. And so I think the real challenge is, if you're getting into any of these spaces, you know, and actually let me sort of getting back to the first project I did where I had no idea what I was doing. you'd never become an entrepreneur if you knew exactly what you were doing and all the challenges you faced. You would go get a real job. No, it's true. I have a friend who started a publishing company. He had a great idea for a publishing company, changed the model a little bit, and he went to a number of venture capitalists and said, I'm going to do this. And the venture capitalists are going, well, you're going to make a decent salary every year. You're going to sell it for maybe $100,000 when you're done. Why don't you just get real jobs? And that's true. Most social entrepreneur projects do not pay off compared to getting a real job. So you have to have that desire to go do it yourself. You have to have that sort of lack of judgment to go do it yourself, and then to figure out how to actually do it. And at the same time, you're getting into, with anything involving infrastructure, very, very regulated fields with very strict rules, and everything you do has to be geared towards those rules. The other thing about it, whenever you're in one of these areas, and this is something that I think too many entrepreneurs forget, and I saw this a lot in the energy field with that wave of new companies that came in. There are people who've been working in any of these fields you're trying to reinvent or change and improve for 30 or 40 years, and they've done great work, and they've reinvented it in their own time. And a lot of these companies come in and say, we've got a better idea, and you guys aren't interested in it anymore. And not only does it hurt them as a company, because they're not getting the wisdom that's been accumulated in the field for a long time, it also gets a lot of these guys thrown out of the field. I've seen companies that come in and say this, and I've seen people just say, yeah, we won't work with you. If you don't understand where the field came from, if you don't understand why this is important and why this works, then you really shouldn't be part of this. And I think solar is a great example. I have 10 seconds, so I'll give the solar example. There's a book that came out, and I think everyone should read it, by John Perlin, called 6,000 Years of Solar. And he traces the idea of solar energy back 6,000 years, which is, you don't think of solar panels, you think of solar panels, they really kind of came to our current existence, or their current formation, about the 1960s, 1970s. But the idea goes back that far, and that these ideas that we're working on, none of them are completely new. If you do come up with a completely new one, you're a national, international treasure, and maybe one person out of this entire city will. But to see what that building process is and how you fit into that, that's really the hardest thing to do. And if you can figure out that, then you can really be successful. So I think I've just gone over my 10 minutes. Thank you all for having us.
Thanks guys. So stay with us. We can have a 5-minute break. We're going to set the panel, and then we're going to start right away. And then there's lunch.
Normalement, je crois que je l'écoute. En fait, on est sur le même niveau. Peut-être que le chat part en communication ou un truc comme ça. Tu vois, quand j'ai écrit, je vais voir. Bah, tu vois,
Excellent sujet. Hey, everybody, please sit down. We're going to start.
Great, thanks. So I'm Christina, and I'm super excited to be facilitating this panel on entrepreneurship for social change. We have some great people both working at super exciting startups and some co-founders here. And to get sort of a sense of the audience of what we're going to be talking about, I'm just wondering how many people here, just quick raise of hands, are considering or have considered starting a business? And thanks so much. And how many people here are considering potentially working for a startup at some point? Okay, great. So this looks like it's a perfect audience. That's great. Okay, great. So I'm just going to quickly introduce our amazing panelists here. This is Jay Ely. She has a Bachelor of Architecture from Cornell, and she was only out of school for around a year when she co-founded Public Matter. And Public Matter, they are a research and design studio based here in New York, and they use spatial design and activity-based programming to build social capital and to improve communities. So that would be really exciting to hear more about. And here is Thomas Hutchins. He's also a co-founder of Moon Energy. And they provide expert advice, engineering, and software solutions for commercial real estate clients to reduce their energy costs, carbon footprint, and to to optimize their assets. Before co-founding Boomi had 15 years of experience in consulting, tech, and software, and he has a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from Georgia Tech. Great, and on this side here, we have Elena Pinero. She has a Bachelor of International Relations from Boston University and a Master of International Relations as well from the New School. And she started out with finance before, in 2011, joining Bruna as a community development intern. And she now works at this company as the Director of Evaluation and Development. So for those of you who haven't heard of Bruna, they're a social enterprise that produces a variety of teas and energy drinks from a naturally caffeinated plant called guayusa, which is grown in the Amazon. And also recently, they're the favorite drink on the Burning Man crowd here, so congratulations to that. And this is James Su here, and he has a Bachelor of English and Political Science from Duke. And he was working as a secretary of CF50, the first global crowdfunding think tank, before joining Return on Change, which in 2012 as their director of operations. And Return on Change is a crowdfunding platform that connects startups with investors. And the difference between perhaps the more well-known ones like Kickstarter is that they focus on equity. So this is an equity platform. And now I'm going to read an introduction. I'm going to let you all talk a bit for a couple of minutes about your company and very briefly introduce yourselves in more detail. So let's start.
She mentioned my name is Jay. We have a design consultancy firm. We do direct cross-section between architecture, design, and public art. We really try to take spatial design to a new level where it impacts the way that human behavior is taking the change on the environment. And that could be something close to where we want people to be more engaged with each other and getting to meet their neighbors, to all the way to just being simply writing down something on a wall that the world can see and being able to speak out your voice with low barrier of entry. So we're trying to anticipate.
I'm going to maybe stick a little bit to Christina emailed us about regarding what our experience is with starting a business under entrepreneurship. So I think that the first thing that she had asked was why do we, what is the opportunity to sell in the market, and why do we started to go after that. Before I did that, just real technical or engineering background versus so technical engineering, and is everybody else more liberal arts? That's enough. What is the crowd here? We're students, right? Finishing school or recently finished school? Yeah. Okay. So I think for us, what we saw in the market was my partner and I are both engineers. We both have worked in buildings trying to make systems work, like pumps, fans, lights, air conditioning, heating, things of that nature. And we have both worked for big companies for a long time. When you work for a big company, you start to see a lot of things that you don't like. And then you move to another big company and you say, wait a minute, this place has lots of things I don't like either. The grass is always greener. So I think that was probably our experience. And both of us really wanted to go do something on our own. So when all of you raised your hand earlier about wanting to do something for yourself or considering doing something for yourself, I applaud that because it takes a lot of guts to do it. I'm sure everybody would agree with that. It's not easy. It can be very rewarding. There's lots of highs, there's lots of lows. Hopefully there's more highs than there are lows. Specifically, some of the challenges that we face and are facing on a daily basis, I would say probably two really big ones. One is focus. You're out doing things on your own. You're always going to see things that you either want to do or you want to do better. And for us, I think the biggest challenge is staying focused on what it is we do, identifying specifically, I would say in the energy efficiency space, there's lots of different directions you can go. You do software, you do installation, you just do consulting. And I kind of break it down to when you're working with your clients and your customers, answering the question, what do you do? What can Boone Energy do for you? And sometimes it's, well, what do you need? So balancing that, what do you do versus asking your customers, what do you need to do? That could be a really big challenge because you want to get business. You want to grow, you want to do things for your customers. But at the same time, you really need to stay focused. I've heard this a lot. I don't know if you guys would agree. When you lose your focus on what it is you're trying to do, that's when you can really kind of get off track. That's when you can, okay, sure. That's when you can really get off track. So I would say, like this? Yeah. Perfect. There it is. All right.
Just scream out if you can't hear.
So again, just staying focused. It's not easy. Choosing what you do is not an easy thing to do. But when you do choose that, you do focus on it. Do it well and keep the path. Kind of like from Solar. Stay on target. Stay on target. So that's enough babbling for a few minutes. And pass it over to Dan.
So as Christina mentioned, Return on Change, we're an online investment platform, and what that means is that we connect startups with investors to evolve their investment. We also focus on certain sectors that we consider critical. So clean energy, life sciences, social enterprise, and technology. The founding of our company coincided with the passage of the Jobs Act, which basically allows companies to publicly advertise that they're raising capital, as well as raise capital from investors. That's the founding.
James, maybe, I don't know if everyone here is familiar with sort of the regulation around startups, so maybe you could just explain in some very simple language what that change actually means.
So the Jobs Act has two primary sections. So Title II of the Jobs Act allows companies to publicly advertise. So prior to the passage of the Jobs Act, companies were not allowed to use social media, the internet, email blasts to say that they're raising funds in exchange for equity. Title III allows everyday investors to invest in startup investment opportunities. So that's the Jobs Act.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Aliana Pinheiro, and I work for a social enterprise called Bruno. As Christina mentioned, we're a beverage company. We buy Guayusa from indigenous farmers in the Amazon and process it in Ecuador and soon in Peru. We're opening up in Peru as well. And then we have a company side here as well in the US that makes it into all the great products that we sell, tea, like for hot tea, iced tea, and energy drinks. All based on Guayusa. We're a fair trade certified company as well. So I was actually working down in the Amazon for 3 years as the director of monitoring and evaluation, and I also worked with the starting the new cooperatives of Guayusa producers. So it's really interesting work. Those of you who are interested in doing startups that have an international focus and development focus, it's, I think, as Tom mentioned, it's challenging. You want to stay focused, watch your mission creep, as we call it in the nonprofit sector. You have to be really careful that you have a clear vision and focus of your organization so that you can be really effective at what you do.
Great, thanks so much. So very soon we're going to hand it over to the audience to ask some questions. I'm just going to get the panel a bit warmed up first. So we have 2 co-founders here, and then we have 2 people who work in startups. So I'm going to ask the co-founders now, why did you choose the business model? All the businesses here, they saw a social or environmental challenge, and then they started a company to address this. So why did you choose the business model?
Okay, perfect. So for us, we are an energy services provider. So we help companies like commercial real estate owners and anybody or everybody knows what a data center is. It's a big space for the servers and network equipment. live and run things like the internet and financial networks and whatnot. And having worked for big companies in the past, you can get kind of lethargic and slow to respond and slow to react. So what we saw was an opportunity to really help companies go from an idea of how to make their buildings, their facilities more efficient, to actually getting it into delivery. Because energy efficiency ideas are great. There's lots of solutions out there, but actually implementing them and seeing the results of how solutions can reduce the carbon, reduce the energy spend in a facility, that's really all that matters. It's not just actually coming up with ideas and designs for us. Making it happen, the results are really what matters. So for us, we want to be an agile and a hands-on company that helps business owners, building owners, not just identify opportunities, but actually get them installed so that they could reap the benefits of energy efficiency and create that good for the environment type of a solution. That's what we try and stay focused on, is really focusing on delivering results, where past maybe in the bigger companies we work for, we wouldn't be able to do that so quickly.
I think that actually what Tom mentioned was pretty accurate to a lot of different fields, where unless you are in an extremely agile or smaller group of people, it's really difficult to be mobile and to be able to implement action really quickly. So the business model is not necessarily about how we want it to develop or further develop how I want to change design, but it was also about how can we make design more human-centered, and especially with the growing trend of design being more mainstream, and everyone was realizing that if something is a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, and by aesthetically pleasing maybe it's just that it calls to you or it makes you agree with it more, that it allows really something that it creates a change faster than if you were not able to reach the audience at that point. So, and that's something that I think a lot of designers need to do, but have not spoken that, our design is committing to species. So, I think that's probably why I decided to step out of working for someone else or working for this different design company and to start something else, because that's where I realized that the design world was kind of lacking. And that on top of being able to be mobile and being able to produce work and execute faster was something that really drove the way that I developed Help Matter and started to start my company.
Just keep the microphone for a bit, because the next question is also directed to you. So, starting a company is difficult. It's common knowledge that only one in 5 start a market. Addressing social change, as we all know here, is also difficult. So, it seems that starting a social enterprise almost is like twice as difficult. What do you think it is about your business or your way of working or your idea actually has allowed you to succeed in this field?
It's a funny question, or a great question, because I have a joke that my partner and I we're wolves in sheep's clothing here, because we're profit business. We're great. It's inherent in the energy efficiency space, and it's socially good endeavor. So for me personally, it's something that I can talk about. Living in New York, a lot of people are finance or other businesses. Nothing wrong with that. But I can talk about energy efficiency as my business and what I do, and be proud of that. But at the same time, I'm a businessman. I'm trying to deliver solutions and generate a profit at the same time. So I'm pretty fortunate in that. So some of the challenges aren't probably the same as they're going to be for Jay or James or some of the other guys in this space here at CSI. The challenges we face are that energy efficiency for our customers isn't really boiling down to just dollars and cents. They're not going to do it purely because it's good for the environment. They're going to do it because it makes sense financially. Even the big socially acute companies like who might the social good of energy efficiency with the reality lines of he does a great.
No, a for-profit company and being able to balance the kind of morality or ethics of, okay, I have to charge what most people in the industry are charging, even though the outcome is something that we're delivering as a vision of it's not just simple, like what everyone else is offering. It has a social agenda, and it is hoping to reach a larger goal. And I think a lot more people are appreciating that, and that there's a growing trend towards knowing where their money is going towards also. So we're kind of in a good time where if you are going towards social enterprise, that you're not fighting against the current anymore, where people do believe you when you're saying, oh, I want to create more energy efficiency in buildings. That's what we aim to do solely. So.
Great. I actually want to sort of building on that. I'd love to ask Elena a bit about this idea of for-profit and the social mission, because Runa is competing in a field with a lot of large for-profit actors. You're basically, in the energy drink sector, they're basically competing against Coke and Pepsi. So have you found that having a social mission has helped Runa in their marketing, or have you found that at times the for-profit and the social mission of the company are at ends with each other?
Thanks, Christina. Actually, as different panelists were answering that question, I thought, I want to speak up on this too. So, yeah, I mean, so just to give you guys a little outline, so we're a hybrid social business. We have a for-profit side and a nonprofit side. I work for the nonprofit side. However, we do work together pretty closely. And, you know, working down the Amazon with the for-profit side, it was buying from the same farmers that I was going to cooperative meetings with. I mean, we interacted a lot. But we do have, you know, slightly different missions, and we do work on different kinds of projects. And also, the nonprofit's funding comes entirely from grant makers and donors. We don't get any funding from the for-profit side. And we also don't fund, you know, we're not just some sort of like tax shelter for the for-profit side. We do have our own agenda and things that we are doing out there. But to answer your question, Christina, I think that Runa's angle, being an organically certified product and also a fair trade certified product, I think does help with certain markets. You know, there are those conscious consumers who are really concerned with you know, where their products come from and if they're sustainably grown. And I think actually the sort of clean energy marketing, which we, I guess, started about 1.5 years ago, where it's about, you know, people are interested more about what they put in their bodies. And so, you know, we're marketing this energy drink as, you know, you can have this energy drink and you get a ton of caffeine and antioxidants, but you're not getting all the chemicals and the, you know, weird things that you can't pronounce. So I was mentioning Christina on the back of your energy drink. So I think actually the marketing angle that we found is most successful is actually more on the lines of you know, organic clean energy rather than the social mission and the work that we do in Ecuador. To me, it seems like kind of a shame because I wish that it mattered more to a wider audience. But if the same people are going to pick up a Snapple or an Honesty or a Runa, then we need to be able to convince those people that they want to buy the Runa. And the work we do is supported by that purchasing that bottle. And so if we can get them to purchase the bottle because it's organic and clean energy and everything, that's great. If we can get them to purchase the bottle because it's supporting a social mission, because it's you know, fair trade certified and stuff, that's great too. I will say though that Whole Foods, for example, wanted us to have a fair trade certification before they would put us in their stores. So we're reaching a really big market in Whole Foods, and whether the consumers care or not, you know, the retailer did care. So I mean, I think it's complicated, especially when you're dealing in these types of products, to find out what your demographic really cares about and wants.
But yeah, to be totally honest, I think it's more along the lines of the benefits of the beverage draft.
Right, and James, I'm wondering, so what Return on Change does is connect a lot of other social enterprises or businesses startups that have a social mission to investors. So Elena talked a bit about consumers. What are your thoughts on investors? Do they specifically, but when they go to Return on Change, are they specifically looking to invest in a social enterprise, or is it all about financials here as well?
I think it's definitely a mix of both. I mean, you know, we work exclusively with for-profit companies, so I think the investors do want, we are driven by financial incentives, but at the same time, since we do focus on certain sectors, you know, there are other considerations that come into play. So, you know, we don't ask for an impact on our report, we don't ask for metrics like that, but, you know, we really leave it up to investors to decide whether this is a worthwhile investment opportunity.
Great, and I have a bunch of other questions, but I feel like looking from the audience, you might as well. So we can open it up. Just raise your hand, and I'll come over to the microphone. Someone bring you a microphone.
Hi, thank you everyone for coming. Introduce yourself. My name is Aisha Muhammad. I'll be part of the Climate Society program at Columbia. And thank everybody for coming. I have a question for Jay for Public Matter. I'm just wondering, when you're looking for strategies for aesthetic pleasing design in different communities, how do you come up with different strategies for different socioeconomic communities? Because, you know, here in New York City, you know, you may take strategies into Manhattan and there's a younger population, and Brooklyn or something like that in Williamsburg, and people may be all about that. But then when you go to somewhere like the Bronx, where there's a population of mostly like Blacks and Hispanics, and they're older and they don't maybe have the same outlets to learning about why this will be good for the community. What kind of strategies do you have to influence more of the community to be involved from a socioeconomic perspective and even from like an age perspective as well?
Actually, that's kind of a perfect question, just also because we recently successfully funded a Kickstarter that was funding a project specifically addressing that cause, which was we wanted to build a 8-foot by 8-foot wall that has certain fun qualities about it that it lights up all that and people want to test, but the whole purpose of it that it's a neutral zone that allows people to come in, and it's just a medium that allows people from all different demographics, whether that be socioeconomically different or ethnically different. And I think that, and we allowing that to happen and giving them that platform is probably generally where most of our products lie. So it's less about disrupting, or less, and a lot of these are like hot words that are happening in startups, and is more about being very subtly and implemented rather than being intrusive or very obvious. And that's, I guess that would be one of our strategies. It's just that we offer a medium rather than the method. And a lot of, from my understanding, a lot of design firms and the urban design that I worked for previously have started to change their outlook in the way that they approach projects, is that they don't offer the solution saying this, you must do this. It's more about offering the way that they can do the solution. That's a good question.
Other questions?
Hey, my name is Alan Miles. I'm the chair of Sustainus, which is a U.S. group of young people advocating for sustainable development, climate solutions. So I come from more of an organizing advocacy background. I wanted to ask everybody in the panel, how do you see social startups and social enterprises helping to advance advocacy for that? It also could benefit the businesses. So, for example, if we price carbon, then the energy efficiency business would grow even more, or the clean energy business would grow even more. Do you see a role for startups or innovative social enterprises in advancing that advocacy, or do you see social businesses as kind of more removed from the politics of the regulatory regimes that shape the markets for the public.
I definitely think it's both. I was just sitting here thinking, I wonder how many people here know what their carbon footprint is, or know what their electric usage is over the course of a day, or a month, or a year, or as you commute to work. What are the options? And one of the things that we struggle with in our business specifically, and I'll give this building as an example. There's probably 200 or something different tenants in this building. Some of them have multiple floors, some of them have very small spaces. And we tossed around the idea, we're putting a whole new building control system. It's going to be a hosted solution so you can access it from your phone or anywhere you have internet access. We're going to give tenants access to their specific sites. So a tenant will be able to log in and look at how much energy they're using at that specific moment in time. And the idea we tossed around was, well, should we let the other tenants see what the other tenants are doing, rank them according to themselves? On one hand, if you measure yourself and you see where you are relative to your peers or maybe not your peers, you get an idea of what your impact is from the energy consumption perspective. On the other hand, from the business perspective, the building owner doesn't really want to pit the tenants against each other because that doesn't create a lot of harmony necessarily. It might make them improve if they're aware of what they're doing, what energy they're using, but from the business side, there's some negative consequences as well. So specifically to your question, yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely a believer that when you are creating awareness of issues, whether it's energy consumption or something else socially, that people become more aware of it, and as we become more aware of the energy that we use, I think we change our behavior. So when your behavior changes, it drives energy efficiency projects. That's good for my business. So yeah, I'm definitely in favor of that. Want to go this way or?
So I guess to answer your question, since we are an online investment platform, a lot of investors who come to our site, some are looking for specific investment opportunities in certain sectors. But regardless, when they come to our platform, all of the deals are presented to them. And if an investor is interested in technology, he's still exposed to startup companies that might be in social enterprise or life science. And what we noticed is that a lot of investors tend to do cross deals. So even if they come to this site looking for a certain investment opportunity, or if a company brings their own investors to the platform, there is a certain level of exposure to new types of industries, companies that feature on the platform. So from an advocacy point of view, I'm not so sure if I can answer that question. But from a raising awareness and exposure point of view, I definitely think our platform somewhat facilitates that.
I would say that Bruna, in Ecuador, in the context that I was working in before, definitely didn't try not to get involved in politics, because in Ecuador, politics can be a little bit touchy. We have a organization, or we're friends with people from an organization that just got closed down and someone got sent out of Ecuador for kind of messing with the politics of oil drilling in the Amazon. So we purposefully do not kind of do advocacy and kind of anything that's against the government, because we understand that we're guests there still. However, we do a lot of work in spreading, so we do a lot of research on the nonprofit side down in Ecuador, and so Wayusa is a new plant, and we've been doing a lot of research on how best to grow Wayusa, what's the genetic diversity of Wayusa, the chemical components, and I mean, we share all of that information. We just put out a best practices manual that's open for the public, that's for government institutions to use, for other NGOs, for other businesses if they wanted to, and of course the farmers and the cooperatives. So in that sense, in terms of spreading kind of awareness and knowledge that we produce, definitely. And then furthermore, we work with the cooperatives, like I've mentioned several times, and part of that is about empowering the farmers to take over more steps of the supply chain and be able to be empowered to be decision makers in the supply chain.
Oh, sure. So I think that generally there's no direct impact in advocacy. I think in a lot on Mr. Markham's discussions, but I do think each of the sectors that they work in, we try to bring more awareness to the public that this is what's happening, and more knowledge that is out there that people can base their decisions on. I think that allows there to be an impact on the way that advocacy can be possible.
So that was a really, really interesting question. And I would also, building on this, I'd love to see what is the role, we're using the role of startups as yourself, social entrepreneurs, in addressing social environmental change.
Environment specific to climate or just environment in general?
In general.
I didn't think of that.
Yeah, my first reaction to that is, being in your own business, you choose your own path. So you can go and you can try and develop new solutions or new ideas around things that pertain to what it is you're doing. It may not be as it's free to do that if you're working for somebody else. You guys can comment on that for sure. But when you're on your own, you choose what your path is. So again, you have to focus, you predict what it is you want to do, but you also have the freedom to go out and develop new ideas. And those new ideas maybe spur your competitors to do things differently than they are, and spur them to change. And hopefully it's changed for the better of the industry that you're in.
So I'm actually going to have to echo what Jay said earlier. I think our company as a startup, we kind of have a residual impact rather than a direct impact. Just case in point, we helped raise investment capital for a clean energy company very recently. We have a hand in creating impact, but we don't go about facilitating that change ourselves directly.
Christina, I'm sorry, I kind of lost the thread. Can you just repeat the question?
We can actually take a question from the audience and we can get back to that.
Hi, my name is Pierre. I'm from Central America. I wanted to point out some of the ideas that they were gathering. Because you mentioned that you don't get into politics or in Latin America, and I kind of guess why, because there's a lot of problems. And my question is firstly for you, and how can you, it's not of course not a personal question, how can you expect to get a real change if political view is still preserving the same perception? Because sometimes when social organizations are there doing good things for the environment, and we have a lot of opportunities in Latin America, but if we don't have a political view, the problem is not going to be the same as afterwards, So there's your perception, and about how can you evaluate the cooperation in terms of empowering these people to be, their own masters and take their problems into their hands. And for the whole panel, please, how can you explain the interaction of the social enterprises and the empowerment they're producing in the less minorities they are impacting? And how do you expect that at some point the social enterprise will create enough power for a person or for a startup or any social initiative will create enough power for the people that have been targeted or that means for them to raise their voices or raise their actions and start movement? And do you think that will impact politics or political laws or the policies of some kind?
Thank you for your question. I think, one thing to say first is that RUNET does work with the local governments. We work on the provincial level, the municipal level, and then also with the ministries, especially the environment and social development and things like that. We have worked to implement certain policies, and that is part of our mission, to work with the governments to implement certain policies to help farmers basically have an easier time marketing their goods in a sustainable way and making sure that, especially around Wayusa and then other plants that potentially will get marketed in the future, are grown sustainably in organic systems, in agroforestry systems, so that they're not disrupting the Amazon. So it's not that we totally stay out of politics or are afraid of politicians in general. We're not, and we do interact with them, and we partner with them in a lot of senses. However, we definitely try to stay out of Rafael Correa's way. I mean, first off, the organization itself, Runa Tarquino, which is the business side in Ecuador, has a $500,000 investment from the government. And so, I mean, I think that's a vote of confidence that the government thinks that what we're doing is good, is positive for the people. But I think it also, I mean, there's a guy who sits on the board of the company, but it's always a different guy who shows up. They never really know what's going on. You always have to explain it to them again. So they don't really take an active voice in the company. But I think it's important to, for me to disclose that. But I think to your question about, how do we expect things to change if the politics aren't changed? I mean, everybody has their own, every organization has their mission and has their focus. And, back to what Tom said, like sometimes there are moments when we say, hey, this isn't good what's going on, and maybe it's a little bit more political minded, but we also have to stick to our focus and our mission. And that isn't necessarily getting involved in advocacy campaigns against oil, for example. Even if personally we don't know if they should be drilling in the Amazon. So I think that's probably why, and I think that there are great organizations that do that, but we stick to what we do best. I think you had a separate question for the other.
I just believe that at the end, it's just I believe at the end, I love social initiatives and I'm very pro startups and everything, but at the end there is no political regulations. So it could be for instance in Europe, I read that the startups have now a lot of because political is always there, the status quo somehow. So so how my question is, do you expect that the work of social enterprise will empower people enough for making a real change that will really change political, or it's just like for for accomplishment or for forward?
That's why I want to comment, because I think I'll give James some props. I think this is why what he's doing is so important, because when you start a new business, you have to be able to fund it, whether it's dollars or something that is ultimately money. And a lot of times for social initiatives, the money comes from the government, and there's a lot of funds out there. So you go to the government for those programs, or you go to be private. And so what James is doing is giving a new channel and casting a very wide net for funds that can help people, whether you want to run a business and try and generate profit, or whether you want to run a business that's purely trying to drive social change. So I think this is a very good example of why what he's doing. It makes some of these things, some of these ideas that you have, it makes it way more possible than it would have been 5 or 10 years ago when there wasn't access to that kind of thing.
And James, maybe you could comment a bit on what you think the changes in regulations and return on change, how you see that having potential to change the landscape for social enterprises in the U.S.
So you mentioned that crowdfunding regulations, a lot of politicians want to maintain the status quo. So for Return on Change, we were actually we launched at around the time the Jobs Act was passed. So, while the Jobs Act was passed, final regulations still have to be ironed out by the SEC. So we actually took an active role in writing comment letters to the SEC. Our CEO went to DC pretty often to express his views, give his suggestions and opinions on what the final regulations should end up looking like. And I think, especially within crowdfunding, like you mentioned, a lot of companies, within the social enterprise space, there is a certain stigma associated with social enterprise, especially within the private sector. So, even us, when we go out to raise capital, a lot of investors are kind of hesitant about investing in our company because we do focus on certain sectors. And they consider social enterprise to be not as profitable as what's hot these days, like tech. So, with us crowdfunding, allowing the public to decide, what kinds of companies should proliferate, what kinds of companies should succeed. I think, that's what I mentioned before about having indirect impacts. Just allowing these companies to get funded to get off the ground, because more often than not, they have a lot of difficulty accessing capital from the private sector.
Great, thanks. So we don't have that much time left. I wanted to just change track a bit because there are a lot of people in the audience who are considering starting up their own business or working in a startup. So I was wondering, first from the co-founders, if you could talk a bit about the main skills that you learned in this startup phase, and maybe something that you know now that you wish that you had known before you started your company.
Okay, you can go first.
Just to put the journey in a short story. The path to deciding to start your own company is actually just your own decision. It's really not that difficult. And I tell my colleagues that, I tell people that I know that always say, oh, I want to do this, I have this idea. And that's really not that difficult. It's just and I don't want to say that most people aren't ready, but it's just a little bit of courage, just to say, okay, I'm gonna quit my job and go full time, knowing that I might not be able to make return on this time investment and maybe this financial investment to start your company. And I think once you make that decision, everything else really kind of falls into place, depending on how well or how hard your drive is. And sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes months, depending on the situation at hand and how far you're trying to develop your idea before you launch or go public. And I think that for me personally, it was a decision that I couldn't find a job that I wanted to work at 100% that would make me happy. And I decided to make that job myself. And then from there, I took a couple steps to start to develop networking skills. And I think that's probably the most important thing to have as founder of a company, is to be able to not only talk about your dreams in a professional way, but also to convince people that your dream is something that's viable. And once you get there, and then all you need to do is take the skill sets that you've learned through school or through experience and be able to kind of meld those two together. And that's pretty much where we are right now. And fortunately, we've had some luck also. And I don't know if the luck is coming from just pure four-leaf clover luck, or if the luck is just from, we happen to be good people, and we met good people, and people with that belief. And I think that's how we've come so far.
Great, thanks. So we heard networking skills, which is perfect because I think there's quite a lot of networking in this conference, so you can already start improving your skills and building your network here. Thomas, you have anything to add?
I would agree completely with Jane with what she said. I would say for me, having probably more experience than anybody else up here, and I mean that truly from age and years, that I had seen a lot of different places and been a lot of different places. And the biggest surprise to me was still the fact that a business has to be run. You still have to run a business. You can have what your mission is, and you have to focus on it. You can't have shift or drift, and you have your, all of your creativity that you have, and all, financial modeling and networking and all these other things, but at the end of the day, you still have to run your business. You still have to balance the book, you still have to make sure people who are working for you or with you are staying on target. So there's a lot of things that you still have to do on a daily basis. So it's challenging. And I would say that it's probably easier for some people than it is for others to go out on your own. I wanted to do it for 10 years before I did. So it's when you make that decision, give yourself a pat on the back, because it really, I think, is a big thing to do. It's very challenging, and it takes a lot of courage, I think. So.
Great. And we've talked a lot about all of the positive things about startups. Now, James, I'm wondering if you could share some of the frustrations that you've had working for a startup or a small company.
Well, I guess, especially if you're working in an early stage company, you often come across team capacity difficulties. So, this might be good or bad depending on how you look at it, but you have to be very versatile. I started off as an English and political science major, so it's a very far cry from business development and finance, but you have to be willing to get out of your comfort zone and learn new things, run different hats, because more often than not, you're not going to have many team members to start off with to have very specialized roles. But I think it's a good thing to a certain extent. You get to build your expertise. For me, I know nothing about coding or programming, but at the end of the day, we are a technology platform, so I do a lot with the product development team to get the product up and running, along with business development, sales, customer acquisition. So, it's not for everyone. If you're comfortable with having a very specialized role, with building your expertise within a certain area, startup probably isn't for you. But, for others who, especially in the beginning of your careers, or if you want to make a career shift, just kind of look for what you're interested in. Startup life will definitely give you that experience to get your feet wet and see what you like to do.
Yeah, I think I agree as well. Probably the most frustrating thing is just being like, what? You have no one to do that. Okay, fine, I'll do it. And so realizing that you have to be like, I'm the director of evaluation and development, but I'm also like my own secretary, and like I have to, make sure that. Sometimes I have to make sure that my boss remembers to pay me, because these aren't automated systems and stuff, and or wait, that I think that's another frustration, like when funding isn't coming through regularly, or when you're kind of in between projects, hey, can you wait 3 weeks or a couple months, or how much money do you need right now? And so being able to say like, okay, I guess I can go, along on that much. And I think when you come in at an early stage, or when you're actually starting to start up yourself, you have to be able to kind of be that flexible and make those kinds of sacrifices. However, I can't just focus on the negative. I think that really being that flexible teaches you so many skills. I think that it has opened so many doors for me working for Bruna. I worked for 6 years in finance, and I've never moved so quickly and learned so much as I did working for a startup. And I went from being an intern to being the director of evaluation and development, and like the one staff member of Bruna Foundation in the U.S. and a representative here in the U.S. So there's a lot of potential, but it's about being that flexible and that willing to sometimes couple down and sacrifice a little bit.
Great, well, that's perfect because you also answered my final question. The panel it's great. The panel is coming to an end, but I wanted to end on a positive note. So ask each of the panelists to share the best thing about their job currently today. You may have answered that, or do you want to add?
Yeah, just to add that, or maybe echo, I've just been given so much opportunity, and I think that the opportunities are there if you take them, and I think they're more available in these types of organizations, so go for it.
The startup environment is pretty casual. You're working in a small team, so you get to, you grow a certain affinity, a certain bond, a camaraderie with the members that you work with. And because you're working in a small team, you also have a direct say in the development of the business. So, any suggestions, any recommendations that you make, ultimately it's up to the CEO. He has executive decision-making authority, but you know, your voice does get heard, and you contribute directly to building out the business from the ground up. And, you know, I think that's a very worthwhile experience. You know, there are definitely resource challenges along the way, but if you're interested in building out your professional expertise, your skill sets, I think, you know, for me, that's the most rewarding aspect of working at a startup.
So, I said at least a few times, staying focused on what you do is really important. I think probably the best thing about running your own business is if your focus isn't working or you don't like it anymore, you can stop and do something else. That's an option that's there. But if you're working for another company, it's small or large, and you don't like it anymore, now you're going to kind of a little conundrum because you have to either get the company to change or you have to quit your job. And that's not a good proposition. So having the freedom to say, you know what, this isn't what I want to do anymore, I'm going to give you something different to me, I think is, right now, that's probably the best thing.
I think, as Alan stated, I think flexibility is something that I think everyone can learn, even though you might be a shy person. And I think startups breed startups. So if you work in that environment and you're able to absorb that much information, it really allows you to then take a stance and say, okay, now I have a tool set, skill set to do my own thing. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things that I've learned in my 2-year journey is that I have met the most incredible people, people beyond architecture and design that inspired projects, it inspired conversations over there, and that is probably the best thing I could hope for and expect. That came unexpectedly, and so I hope that everyone sees the potential to be flexible and not say that, oh, that's not for me. That's not true.
Great, thank you so much. I know I'm starting my own business now, so great. I think that some of our panelists as well may be staying around for lunch, so you can work on your networking skills and also ask them all of the questions that you weren't able to ask during the panel. But for now, please join me in thanking them for sharing their insight and inspiring us all today. And now we're going to have lunch over there. You have vegetarian tacos and some vegetarian. So go ahead and help yourself and talk to each other.
That was so